The air in my hospital room was thick with the scent of antiseptic, a smell I'll forever associate with betrayal. Caroline, my daughter, stood at the foot of my bed, her face a mask of false sympathy. She held up my truck keys, then slowly, deliberately, placed them into her husband Mark's waiting palm. He curled his fingers around them, a smug, final click of a lock. "It's for the best, Daddy," she said, her voice smooth as poison. "We'll handle everything now." Mark just nodded, his eyes already measuring my life for sale. My own hands lay limp on the starchy sheets, useless. I was 82, and a mild heart attack had apparently rendered me an infant. Outside the sealed window, oppressive summer heat shimmered off the asphalt, a visible wave of distortion. The world I knew, the one of dirt and sweat and honest work, felt a million miles away. All I had was this sterile room, and the two vultures deciding my fate. My heart, the traitor in my chest, beat a slow, heavy rhythm of defeat against my ribs. It felt like a countdown. The ride home was a silent ordeal. July 22nd, 2022. I remember the date because it felt like a death sentence. Caroline drove my Ford F-150, her hands gripping the wheel I'd held for 2 decades. I sat in the passenger seat, a ghost in my own machine, watching the familiar fields of corn and soy blur past. The land I had tilled since I was a boy now seemed alien, a landscape owned by someone else. Mark sat in the back, intermittently tapping on his phone, likely calculating commissions. When we pulled into the long gravel driveway of the farmhouse, my home for 60 years, a profound ache settled in my bones. The sprawling wraparound porch, where my wife Martha and I had watched 1,000 sunsets, looked weary. The air smelled of freshly cut alfalfa and dry earth, a scent that used to mean life and sustenance. Now it just smelled of loss. The porch swing Martha had loved so dearly hung perfectly still, as if holding its breath, waiting for a verdict. Inside, the house felt wrong. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, but there was a new, sterile order to everything. My stack of farming almanacs had been moved from the coffee table. On the green oak dining table, a glossy brochure from a high-end real estate agency lay beside a stack of unfamiliar paperwork. Its headline read, "Prime Agricultural Opportunity, 300 acres." They hadn't even waited for me to be discharged. The audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. That evening, they sat me down for what Caroline called a family meeting. It was an ambush. They took their seats opposite me at the dining table, the polished wood reflecting their determined faces. The setting was my own home, but the power dynamic was that of a boardroom where I was the retiree, being handed a gold watch and a shove out the door. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall felt unnervingly loud, each tick a second of my legacy slipping away. "The farm is a financial burden," Caroline began, her voice practiced, devoid of emotion. "We're securing your retirement, Daddy. The upkeep, the taxes. You can't manage it anymore. This is a blessing, really. A chance for you to finally rest without worrying about money." Her words were meant to sound caring, but they were daggers wrapped in cotton wool. She was dismantling my life and calling it an act of love. The betrayal was so deep, it felt like a physical chill. Mark, her accountant husband, chimed in with a barrage of financial jargon. "We've had it appraised at just over $2 million, Samuel. After capital gains and fees, the net proceeds will establish a very comfortable trust for your long-term care." He spoke of my home not as a place of memory and toil, but as an asset to be liquidated. He called me Samuel, not Dad, creating a cold, professional distance. He was erasing family and replacing it with a balance sheet. I tried to speak, to argue. My voice, raspy from disuse at the hospital, came out as a weak croak. "This is my home, Martha." But Caroline cut me off. "Mama would have wanted you to be practical. She wouldn't want you slaving away until you dropped dead in a field." Using my wife's memory against me was a new low, a cruelty so profound it left me speechless. They weren't just taking my land. They were rewriting my history, sanitizing it for their own convenience. My gaze drifted past them to the stone hearth of the fireplace. Resting on the heavy wooden mantel was my grandfather's rusty tin lockbox. It had been there for as long as I could remember, a silent, stoic witness to our family's life. It was dented and the clasp was stiff, but seeing it gave me a flicker of grounding in a world that was tilting off its axis. It was a piece of the past they hadn't yet managed to tidy away. Caroline followed my eyes and let out a sigh of exasperation. Honestly, Dad, you should let me throw that old tetanus trap out. It's just full of junk, old receipts and deeds for land we sold off generations ago. She waved a dismissive hand at it. It's an eyesore. The realtor said we need to declutter to improve the staging. Her casual contempt for an object that had passed through 4 generations of my family was the final, sharpest twist of the knife. Our words sparked a memory, faint and hazy like a dream. I was a small boy, standing by that same fireplace. My grandfather was placing a thick sheaf of papers into that very box. He'd look down at me, his eyes serious. "Some things are more important than money, Sammy," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "The land has a memory. This box holds its voice." I had forgotten that moment until now. Her scorn had unlocked a door in my mind. Mark slid a document across the table. It was a durable power of attorney, granting Caroline full legal authority over my assets and health decisions. My signature was on the bottom, a shaky, spider-like scrawl I barely recognized. "You signed this at the hospital, Dad, just before the procedure," Caroline said smoothly. "The doctor and a nurse witnessed it. I had no memory of it. The medication, the fear, the confusion. They had used my moment of absolute vulnerability as their weapon. The oppressive heat of the day seemed to have seeped into the house, pressing down on me. The room felt airless, the walls closing in. My heart hammered in my chest again, not with exertion, but with pure, impotent rage. They had planned this. Every step was calculated. My health crisis wasn't a tragedy for them. It was an opportunity. I was no longer a father. I was an obstacle that had finally, conveniently, been removed from their path. In that moment of despair, I thought of Martha. I could almost hear her voice, quiet but firm, the way it was when she was certain of something. "The land remembers, Samuel. Never forget that." It wasn't a comfort. Not yet. It was a challenge. A reminder that there were forces older and more permanent than my daughter's greed and a slick real estate agent's contract. The thought was a single solid stone in a swirling flood of defeat. "The agent wants to get the listing active by this Friday," Mark announced, tapping his phone again. "He's already got a developer interested. They're offering cash, a quick close. We could have this all settled in 30 days. A ticking clock. The 30-day closing date for the farm's sale. 30 days to watch my entire life be dismantled, packaged, and sold to the highest bidder. Each day would be a step closer to the erasure of everything I had ever built. I made one last desperate appeal to the daughter I remembered, the little girl with skinned knees and a wide smile. "Caroline," I said, my voice steadier now. "Do you remember the treehouse we built in the old maple tree by the creek? Your mother spent a week painting little yellow flowers on the door because you loved them so much." I was pleading, trying to find a flicker of the person she used to be, the child of this very land. She didn't even flinch. "That tree fell down in a storm 5 years ago, Dad," she replied, her voice flat. "Sentimental value doesn't pay the bills. The property taxes alone are staggering, and you haven't heard a real profit in a decade." It was a brutal, clinical execution of memory. She wasn't just dismissing the past. She was wielding its decay as a justification for her actions. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. They ushered me to the downstairs guest room, explaining it was for my recovery, so I wouldn't have to manage the stairs. The room was comfortable, but the lock on the door felt different. It was a cage with a pleasant view. Through the window, I could see the long driveway. The next afternoon, a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize crunched up the gravel. A man in a tailored suit got out, the realtor. The public humiliation was beginning. My door was slightly ajar. I could hear their hushed, urgent voices in the hall. "He's fully on board with the sale," Caroline lied, her voice dripping with counterfeit sincerity. He's just a bit frail after his stay, so he prefers to rest. Best not to bother him with the details. The lie was so effortless, so practiced. She was selling a narrative along with the farm. The story of a loving daughter managing the affairs of her grateful, fading father. The realtor, a young man named Todd with impossibly white teeth, glanced into my room as they cast. He gave me a quick, pitying smile, the kind you give to a confused grandparent in a nursing home. It was a look that said, "Don't worry, old-timer. The adults are handling things." In that single condescending glance, I was stripped of my dignity, my authority, my very identity. I was no longer Samuel, the farmer. I was just a fixture to be cleared out with the old furniture. But pity can be a potent fuel. His smile lit a fire in the gold ashes of my despair. It was a hard, angry flame. They thought I was a doddering fool, the relic to be managed. They thought the fight was over before it had even begun. In that moment, lying in my gilded cage, I made a silent vow. I would not let them erase me. I would not let them bulldoze my life's work for their convenience. I had to get to my grandfather's lockbox. That night, long after the house fell silent, I began my campaign. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I pushed myself out of bed. The floorboards were cold against my bare feet. Each step from the bed to the door was a monumental effort, a journey of feet, not miles. The weakness in my body was a frustrating counterpoint to the strength of my resolve. I leaned against the doorframe, catching my breath, the silence of the house roaring in my ears. I shuffled into the living room, a shadow moving through a museum of my own life. Moonlight streamed through the large picture window, illuminating the room in shades of silver and gray. It fell directly on the fireplace mantel, making the rusty surface of the tin lockbox gleam with a faint coppery light. It seemed to be waiting for me, a forgotten anchor in a storm. My heart, which had betrayed me in the hospital, now beat a steady, determined rhythm. I was close. My fingers, trembling with a mixture of weakness and adrenaline, finally closed around the cold metal of the box. It was heavier than I remembered. I lifted it from the mantel with both hands and carried it to the dining table, my arms shaking with the strain. I set it down and fumbled with the stiff, ornate clasp. It wouldn't budge. It was locked. And in a sudden, sickening wave of clarity, I remembered that the small brass key had been on my truck's keychain, the keychain Mark now possessed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sank into one of the dining chairs, the weight of my failure pressing down. They had taken everything, down to the key to my own history. The box sat on the table, a silent mockery of my efforts. It held the voice of the land, but it was a voice I couldn't hear. For the first time, I felt the cold, sharp edge of true despair. They had thought of everything. The next week was a blur of indignities. Surveyors came, planting little orange flags all over my fields, charting the boundaries of my life for sale. Caroline would bring me meals on a tray, chattering brightly about the assisted living facility she'd found. "It has a garden club, Daddy. You'll love it." She was redecorating my future, choosing the floral patterns for my prison cell. I would just nod, saving my strength, letting her believe I had accepted my fate. My feigned compliance made them careless. They started leaving paperwork on the dining table, confident I was too broken to care. One evening, I saw an email printout. It was from the developer's lawyer. "Offer is contingent on clear title and no unforeseen covenants or easements. Please confirm the parcel is unencumbered." That word, covenants, lodged in my mind. It was a legal term, a whisper of the possibility, a crack of light under a sealed door. What if the land wasn't as free as they assumed? This sliver of false hope became my obsession. I needed that key. I started watching Mark's habits like a hawk. He always came in through the back door after work, tossing his keys into a ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter. The bowl was next to the cookie jar. It was a routine, a predictable pattern, and in their arrogance, they never considered me a threat who might exploit it. They saw a frail old man, not a patient hunter, waiting for his moment. My chance came on a Tuesday. Caroline had a dentist appointment, and Mark was out in the barn measuring something for the sale. I heard the roar of the tractor starting up, a sound that used to bring me comfort, now provided the perfect cover. My heart pounded as I shuffled into the kitchen. The house was quiet, except for the distant engine. The keys were there, glinting in the ceramic bowl, a jumble of metal, holding the power to my past and future. My hands shook so badly, I could barely separate the small, antique brass key from the modern fob of my truck. The metal felt warm, alive. With the key clutched in my fist, I moved back to the living room, to the tin box still sitting on the dining table. My breath hitched. This was it. The hope was so sharp, it was almost painful. Please, Grandpa, I prayed to a memory. Please, let there be something in here. I slid the key into the lock. The lock turned with a stiff, grinding click that echoed in the silent room. The sound was deafening, a gunshot of defiance. I lifted the lid. The air that rose from the box smelled of old paper, dust, and time itself. It was the scent of my family's history. Inside, nestled on top of yellowed tax receipts and brittle property maps, was a thick, folded document, bound in faded red ribbon. It was heavier than the others, more substantial. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. But just as my fingers brushed the ribbon, I heard the back door slam shut. Mark was back. Panic seized me. I quickly closed the lid, the clasp snapping shut, but didn't have time to lock it. I slid the box back to its original position on the table and shuffled as fast as my frail legs would carry me back to my room. The small brass key now a burning secret in my pocket. I left the document inside, unread. The hope was snatched away again. Mark walked into the living room, whistling. I watched through my cracked door as he glanced at the table. He picked up the unlocked box, jiggled it, and then opened the lid with a curious grunt. My blood ran cold. He pulled out the ribbon-bound document, glanced at the ornate, handwritten script on the cover page, and scoffed. More of the old man's junk, he muttered, tossing it back into the box with utter contempt. He slammed the lid shut and left it there. His dismissal, his absolute certainty of its worthlessness, was the most profound mistake he would ever make. He saw archaic script and old paper. He didn't see power. He didn't see the voice of the land my grandfather spoke of. That night I retrieved the document. Under the weak light of my bedside lamp, I carefully untied the fragile ribbon. The paper was thick, vellum-like, and covered in the elegant cursive of a bygone era. The heading read, Farmland Preservation Trust and Restrictive Covenant. Data. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, my mind racing to comprehend the formal language. And then I saw it. A clause, written in stark, unambiguous terms by my grandfather in 1958. The aforementioned 300-acre parcel, known as the Miller Farm, shall not be sold, subdivided, or otherwise transferred for non-agricultural use. Any sale to a third party requires the unanimous, notarized consent of all direct heirs of the signatory. Unanimous. Not just the person with power of attorney. Every single one. There was more. The document established a restrictive covenant tied to a land trust that voids any sale to a third party without the unanimous, notarized consent of all direct heirs. My grandfather had the foresight to protect the farm from exactly this kind of threat, from a future generation that might see the land only for its monetary value. He had forged a legal shield, and his rusty tin box had been its armory for over 60 years. The land did have a voice, and it spoke legalese. The next morning, I felt a lifetime younger. The weakness in my limbs was replaced by a cold, clear purpose. I needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. I needed someone who understood land trusts, someone who could wield this document like a weapon. I remembered a young man, Ben Carter, whose family farm bordered mine to the north. His father had mentioned Ben went to law school, specializing in agricultural law. It was a long shot, but it was my only shot. Getting to a phone without being seen was the next challenge. Caroline kept my cell phone for safekeeping, but she'd forgotten about the old rotary phone in the dusty corner of my workshop in the barn. It was still connected. That afternoon, feigning a need for fresh air, I made my slow, deliberate way to the barn. The familiar smell of hay and old oil greeted me like a long-lost friend. The oppressive heat was stifling inside, but I'd barely noticed. I found Ben Carter's number in a worn, grease-stained phone book. My finger felt clumsy dialing the rotary phone, the whirring sound and nostalgic echo from the past. When he answered, I didn't waste time. Ben, this is Samuel Miller. I have a legal matter regarding my farm. It's urgent. There was a pause, then recognition. Mr. Miller? Of course. Is everything all right? His voice was respectful, a stark contrast to the condescension I'd grown used to. I arranged to meet him the next day at a diner in the next town over. Getting there was the next hurdle. I told Caroline I wanted to visit Martha's grave. It was a morbid request, but one she couldn't refuse without looking monstrous. She agreed, the sympathy in her eyes as fake as a $3 bill. She would drop me at the cemetery gates and pick me up in an hour. It was the perfect window of opportunity. The cemetery was quiet and peaceful. I stood before Martha's stone for a few minutes, the cool granite a comfort under my hand. They underestimated us, Martha. I whispered to the wind. They forgot what this family is made of. Then I walked through the cemetery to the back gate, which opened onto a side street. Ben was waiting for me in his car, exactly as we'd planned. The simple act of executing a plan, of taking control, felt like drinking water after days of thirst. At the diner, over coffee I didn't touch, I laid the covenant on the table. Ben's eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the document. He read it once, then twice. A slow smile spread across his face. Mr. Miller, he said, his voice filled with a newfound reverence. This is ironclad. It was filed with the County Registrar of Deeds in 1958. It's a permanent encumbrance on the property title. Your daughter's power of attorney is irrelevant. She can't sell without your consent. His words were the sweetest music I had ever heard. Without my notarized consent, I clarified, needing to hear the magic words. And that of any other direct heirs, he confirmed, which for you is just your daughter. But the key is unanimous. Her signature alone is worthless. The sale is dead on arrival. The weight that had been crushing my chest for weeks finally lifted. It wasn't just hope anymore. It was certainty. And explain the strategy. We would do nothing. We would let them proceed, let them sign the purchase agreement with the developer, let them pay the legal fees, and make their plans. We would wait until the last possible moment. The title search for closing should uncover this, Ben said, but small-town property records can be messy. It might get missed. We'll let them trip over it at the finish line. It will be more impactful that way. The cold, calculated precision of it appealed to me. Caroline picked me up from the cemetery, none the wiser. I was just a sad old man who had been visiting his wife's grave. My grief was real, but now it was mingled with a grim, righteous fury. The countdown to the closing day, just 9 days away, was no longer a march to my execution. It was the timer on a bomb I had quietly set under their greedy, triumphant lives. The final week was an exercise in supreme self-control. Caroline and Mark were giddy, already spending the money in their heads. They talked about a European cruise, a new luxury car for Mark. Their conversation was a constant stream of materialistic dreams built on the foundation of my annihilated legacy. I would sit in my chair, nodding, occasionally asking a simple question, playing the part of the docile, forgetful father to perfection. Their arrogance was my greatest ally. The day before the closing, I found Caroline outside the lawyer's office. She was on the phone, laughing. It's finally done, she said into the phone. Tomorrow we sign, and this dusty old money pit is officially someone else's problem. Dad? Oh, he's fine. Happier than ever, really. He knows this is for the best. Hearing her lie so casually, so completely, erased any lingering flicker of familial sentiment. She wasn't my daughter anymore. She was just a stranger who wore her face. That evening, they held a small, celebratory dinner. They even opened a bottle of expensive champagne. They toasted to new beginnings. Mark raised his glass to me. "To you, Samuel," he said, his voice slick with condescension, "for being so understanding. We really couldn't have done it without your cooperation." The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. I just raised my water glass and gave them a small, tired smile. The final insult before the trap was sprung. "There is one small thing," I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through their cheerful chatter. "Before you sign anything tomorrow." I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't the covenant, it was a photocopy of it. I slid it across the polished dining table. "My lawyer, Ben Carter, asked me to give you this. He said you might find it educational." Their smiles froze. The trapdoor had just swung open beneath their feet. Caroline picked up the photocopy, her brow furrowed in confusion. Mark leaned over her shoulder to read. I watched their faces as the words sank in. The color drained from Caroline's cheeks first, leaving a pale, shocked mask. Mark's confident smirk dissolved into a slack-jawed stare of disbelief. He snatched the paper from her, rereading the clause about unanimous consent as if the words might change. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic ticking of the clock. "What is this?" Caroline finally whispered, her voice trembling. "It's a joke, right? Some old, invalid paper." "It's a restrictive covenant," I said, my voice as steady as the oak table. "Filed with the county in 1958, permanently attached to the deed. Then Carter verified it this morning. He says it's ironclad. I let the legal term hang in the air, a final, insurmountable barrier. The original is with the Farmland Preservation Trust, for safekeeping." Mark's face contorted with rage. You old fool, you sat there and let us go through all this. We have a contract, we've paid lawyers thousands." He was sputtering, his composure shattered. "The developer will sue us." "Your contract is invalid," I stated calmly. "You tried to sell something that wasn't yours to sell. Not on your own, anyway. And I do not consent." I said the words slowly, savoring each one. They were the most powerful words I had ever spoken. The fight went out of Caroline all at once. She slumped in her chair, the reality of her defeat crashing down on her. The cruise, the car, the easy life built on my erasure, all of it had vanished. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not greed or pity, but a flicker of fear. She was finally seeing me not as a relic, but as the man who held all the cards, the man whose grandfather had outsmarted her from the grave. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do this to us?" The question was so profoundly selfish it took my breath away. "You mean, why would I stop you from selling my home out from under me after you took advantage of my heart attack?" I asked, the quiet anger finally rising in my voice. "I think the better question, Caroline, is why you would do this to me." She had no answer. She just stared at her hands. Mark, ever the pragmatist, was already scrambling. "This is a negotiation tactic. What do you want, Samuel? A bigger cut? Name your price." He was trying to turn it back into a transaction, the only language he understood. He still didn't get it. He was trying to buy a soul that wasn't for sale. "There is no price," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "The farm is not for sale. Not today, not ever." The next morning, Ben Carter called their lawyer. I could only imagine the conversation. The fallout was immediate. The developer, furious, immediately threatened legal action against Mark and Caroline for misrepresentation and breach of contract. They had signed a document guaranteeing a clear title they couldn't deliver. Their swift, lucrative deal had transformed into a legal and financial nightmare of their own making. The vultures were being preyed upon. I watched from the living room window as they argued on the porch, their voices sharp and ugly. The facade of their perfect partnership was crumbling under the pressure. Greed had been their glue, and with the promise of money gone, there was nothing left but blame and resentment. Mark jabbed his finger at Caroline, his face red with fury. She recoiled, turning away with a choked sob. The home they tried to steal was now the stage for their own personal collapse. 2 days later, they were packing. Their lawyers had likely advised them to liquidate assets to cover the impending legal battle with the developer. The sleek black sedan Mark was so proud of, was the first thing to go. A man from a dealership came and drove it away. Mark watched it go down the long gravel drive, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The first tangible consequence of his avarice had arrived. Caroline approached me as I sat on the porch swing, which had started to move again in the gentle breeze. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "We're leaving," she said. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It was just a statement of fact. She couldn't stand to be in the house, in the presence of her own failure. The farm was no longer a prize to be won, but a monument to her spectacular miscalculation. "Where will you go?" I asked, my voice neutral. I felt no pity, only a vast, empty space where a father's love used to be. "Mark's parents," she mumbled, staring out at the cornfields, now golden and heavy, ready for harvest. The land she had called a dusty money pit were showcasing its quiet, enduring wealth, a beauty and a bounty she had never truly seen. She had looked at it, but she had never understood it. Before they left, Mark came to the kitchen and threw my truck keys on the counter. They landed with a sharp clatter in the same ceramic bowl where he used to toss his own. He didn't say a word. He just glared at me, his eyes filled with a poison I had no interest in absorbing. I watched him walk out the back door for the last time. The sound of the door closing was quiet, final, and deeply satisfying. I picked up my keys. The metal was cool in my palm. The small brass key to my grandfather's lockbox was still on the ring. I separated it and held it up in the afternoon light. Such a small, insignificant-looking thing. An object Caroline would have thrown in the trash without a second thought. Yet it had been the key to everything. To my past, my present, and the future of this land. After they were gone, the silence of the house was profound. It wasn't the sterile, waiting silence of before. It was a peaceful, breathing silence. My silence. My house. I walked through the rooms, touching the familiar furniture, running my hand along the cool stone of the fireplace mantel. The rusty tin box was still there. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Its job was done. That evening I sat on the wraparound porch, watching the sunset behind the western fields. The sky was awash in streaks of orange and purple. It was a sight I had seen 10,000 times, but it had never looked so beautiful. The air smelled of alfalfa and rich earth, the scent of life, not loss. The land was safe. My home was safe. My legacy was intact. I thought of Martha, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. A week later, Ben Carter came by with the final paperwork, confirming the developer's lawsuit had been settled out of court, at great expense to Mark and Caroline. He also brought a new document for me to sign. It was an updated filing for the Farmland Preservation Trust, strengthening its language and adding a clause that it could only be amended or dissolved by a 3-person board. The first board member was me. Who were the other 2? I asked, pen in hand. "Well," Ben said with a smile, "I was hoping you'd consider me for one. And for the 3rd, I was thinking we could leave it to your discretion to appoint someone you trust when the time is right, someone who understands what this land really means." He was giving me the power to choose my own successor, to ensure the farm's protector would be a guardian, not a predator. I thought of the future. Not the terrifying, sterile future Caroline had planned for me, but a real future. A future where this land would still be here, feeding people, breathing with the seasons. A future beyond me, beyond my memory. I thought about the families nearby, young farmers struggling to get started. Perhaps the 3rd board member would be one of them, a true heir to the spirit of the land, if not the blood. I signed the document with a firm, steady hand. My signature was no longer the shaky scrawl of a victim. It was the clear, confident mark of a man who had fought for his home and won. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and discarded, but like the land itself, I was more resilient than they knew. I had roots that ran deeper than their greed could ever reach. I handed the signed paper back to Ben. He nodded, placing it carefully in his briefcase. "It's done, Mr. Miller. The farm is protected, for good." I stood up and walked to the door, looking out at the fields stretching to the horizon under the vast, open sky. The land was quiet, but I could hear its voice clearly now, a low, steady hum of gratitude. I took a deep breath of the clean country air and walked out onto my porch.